sponsored by NordVPN. Let's take a look at a map of some key Asian archaeological sites that are between 100 and 200,000 years old, roughly. A time period called the Middle to Late Pleistocene, a cold time in the Earth's climate, a period of frequent glaciations, woolly mammoths, the whole shebang. It's the Ice Age. Over in modern Israel and Palestine, you have Skul and Kafza caves, humming with the activity of Homo sapiens. Groups like these were probably hunting and fishing along the shores of an ancient lake. Now, the Nefud Desert in Saudi Arabia, leaving behind nothing but their footprints. North and east in modern Iraq and Iran, Neanderthals are making their home in Shanidar Cave and the Zagros Mountains, hunting wild goats, which can't have been easy for sure. Further east in the mountains of Uzbekistan, Teshik Tash Cave became the final resting place of this young Neanderthal child. To the north of here, Neanderthals and Denisovans occupied Denisova Cave. Sometimes on their own, sometimes together, evolutionary cousins raising hybrid families, though they almost certainly didn't think about it like that, I would bet. Denisovans lived further east too, according to the proteins recovered from this jaw found in Baishia Karst Cave, breathing in the thin air of the Tibetan plateau. In warmer climates though, tucked away on the island of Java, Homo erectus was still living along the Solo River, no doubt living a similar life to their ancestors who entered the region well over 1 million years before. Probably unaware that they were just over the seas from two other groups of hominin, Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, from Flores and Luzon respectively. As you can see, this is a really incredible moment in the evolution of our species. There's just so much going on, so many different forms of hominin leading slightly different lives in different regions all around the world. In between all of these finds, all these various forms of ancient human sits South Asia, modern India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So who lived there? For the past 3 months, I've been working away at this problem, reading paper after paper, interviewing experts from different fields, and it's complicated. It's really complicated. I think South Asia is often sidelined in discussions of human evolution. For some reason, it just doesn't get the same attention as Africa or Europe or Southeast Asia, but I have come to believe that it is in many ways the most interesting region. A region that gives us a real insight into just how messy and convoluted human evolution was. Obviously, the first line of evidence we have when we're trying to discuss who was living in a specific region, what kind of human, what kind of hominin, are the fossils, the literal remains of humans that lived in that place in that time. And this is what makes studying South Asia so challenging. Hominins have lived in the region for probably 2 million years, maybe even 2.6 million years. And yet, from that early time, down through to when modern Homo sapiens arrived, we only have one cranium, one fossil, the Narmada Cranium. Fortunately for me and this video, I got to chat to Professor Sheela Athreya, who's studied it in depth. Okay, let me share my screen here. We can see. So who is this? Who are we looking at here?
We are looking at a hominin from the Pleistocene in central India. And those are the three most definitive things that I can say about it.
At 1,300 kilometers long, the Narmada is India's 5th longest river. The source of the river springs from the ground at the Narmada Kund Temple in Madhya Pradesh before winding its way down through the mountains into the state of Gujarat and out into the Indian Ocean. On December 5th, 1982, outside the village of Hathnora, Arun Sanakia unearthed the only archaic human remains found in South Asia. Unfortunately, the skull was found in a secondary deposit, which means the river had washed it away from its original location and deposited it elsewhere. So it's been removed from its original context, and as a result, the date range for this skull is really quite broad, between 46,000 and 236,000 years old. Even though it's the only fossil that we have, it's a sample size of 1. I think we are fortunate. It does seem to be a really interesting fossil, though. There does seem to be a lot going on with it.
Yeah, that's definitely fair to say. I mean, one of the first morphometric study of it that, did a complete multivariate statistical analysis of the specimen by Kenneth Kennedy at Cornell University demonstrated that it has one of the highest cranial heights, and that's measured from the base of the cranium at a point called basion at the back of the foramen magnum up to the top of the cranium. It has one of the highest basion bregma heights, so one of the highest crania of, if it's a Homo erectus, of Homo erectus. It's outside the range, actually. But at the same time, you can see it has a very sloping frontal bone behind those big brow ridges. And it has a very rounded, kind of angular back of the cranium. So living humans have a more vertical back of the cranium. And that's what makes our skulls look so round. And this one, even though it's got very rounded features at the top, which do make it seem globular, at the back, it's still angular, which is more like Homo erectus. This individual is inferred to be a female, but that's based on a limited reference sample. It is assuming that there are more robust individuals out there, and then this is less robust.
The cranial capacity is also within the range of modern humans. The average of different estimates works out to about 1,288 cubic centimeters, which is basically the average for a modern woman now. So where does Narmada fit on our evolutionary tree? Approximately, and these things are nuanced, but where approximately does it fit on our evolutionary tree?
If we treat the African Homo erectus as one group, and we treat the Asian Homo erectus as a completely separate group, and the Europeans as a third group, Narmada is not typical of any of them, but it's not so different that we want to come up with yet another species name. And so when the analyses are run that both the African and Asian specimens from a certain time period are called Homo erectus, Narmada fits right in. It has some African and some Asian features.
But also just thinking about how you might have interactions between adjacent populations. South Asia is kind of interesting because to the west, it can get cut off during arid phases because the deserts mean it's very difficult to move east-west. On the eastern side, you've got the other problem. You've got some of the wettest landscapes in the world, and when they get wetter, that must be very difficult. You've got mountainous, really humid forests to try and traverse. But those are that might be accessible during more arid phases. So you've got this pulsed possibility of when you might have interactions from either side, and that could fit well with what Sheela suggests of that. Oh, actually, you've got some western contact, some eastern contact.
What do you think that says about South Asia's position in our human evolution?
The title of the paper, I think South Asia was a geographic crossroads. The other thing I think it says is more about how we partition variation. And so if we partition variation based on the geographic, things that are very geographically disparate, we're going to say, lo and behold, they are very different. And if you ignore all the populations in that intermediary, so South Asia and Central Asia, then your models are obviously lacking something, but you're also missing the point of what we're supposed to be studying, which is how did humans vary in the past? I think that's what we're supposed to be studying. I don't think we're supposed to be asking how many categories were there in the past. What we should be asking, what is interesting to ask if we really want to understand the evolutionary history of humans, isn't the labels again, it's the processes. What are the evolutionary processes that are shaping us, right? To me, that's more fascinating. I would love to know what environmental and climatic factors, maybe even technological factors, raw material availability, subsistence patterns. What were the things that were shaping these populations in the past?
So there we go. The only human cranium from the Middle Pleistocene in South Asia really shows it to be a bridge between two groups of distant hominins. What's going on in Africa, what's going on in East Asia. Its mix of features, East and West, modern, archaic, really resists an easy classification. And that's probably the point we should be taking away from it. Whoever lived in South Asia during the Middle Pleistocene was really at a crossroads, both in time and geography. They're going to be influenced by a lot of factors, some of them external, but also some of them internal. This was no evolutionary dead end. With only one fossil, we have to look elsewhere for clues as to what was going down in South Asia. Naturally, this being the Stone Age, we're going to look at stone tools. Now, assigning stone tools to a particular hominin in the absence of fossils is really tough. Absolutely fraught with nuance, but we can paint with some really broad strokes. In this Middle Pleistocene, there are two families of tools that really stand out. The first are Acheulean stone tools. The absolute classic Acheulean artifact are these large bifacial hand axes, but they did also produce cleavers, they did also use flakes, but the hand axe is really characteristic. Early examples start to appear around 1.75 million years ago in Africa and are associated with the evolution of bigger-brained hominins like Homo erectus and later Homo heidelbergensis. That's family number one. That's the Acheulean. The next family of stone tools, the next development, occurred between 400 and 200,000 years ago. These are called Middle Paleolithic tools. The idea here is that now flakes are the star of the show. The napper would create a striking platform on the bottom of the rock. They would then shape the core to create the outline of a tool. Then with one precise bosh, the perfectly shaped flake is removed, and now you have your spear point, or whatever you wanted. Archaeologists call this the Levallois technique, and it's associated with the evolution of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Multiple groups used them. These changes may seem kind of small to us, but as archaeologist Gopesh Jha and James Blinkhorn will explain, these are legit technological breakthroughs, no doubt about it.
To explain, and particularly this shift from Acheulean technology to kind of this Levallois Middle Paleolithic technology, Acheulean tools are biface. You can imagine it a bit more like a sculpture in that you start off with a block of marble, you chip things away till you realize this is the shape that I wanted in the end. Whereas you're doing a lot of that shaping Levallois technology, but then you've got this one final strike, which is make or break it into the thing that you've been preparing towards.
Yeah.
So it's cognitively more complex to do, that you've got to think steps in advance and all the different parameters you can control, but it gives you a lot more control of the shape and size of the flake that you're removing, presumably because that's desirable for the tool that you want to make.
And throughout the Middle Pleistocene, you have so many industries where people are shifting from these heavy tools to the lighter tools. And that may have something to do with localized adaptation. Like when there is a huge scarcity of resources, I don't want to travel with these huge artifacts.
Yeah.
I want to be more efficient in terms of adaptation. And hence, I rather focus on these smaller flakes than these heavy artifacts.
Yeah.
And these smaller flakes can be of n amount of types, like they're made in different technique, this and that, this and that.
Okay, let's look at some South Asian stone tools. These are stone tools from Atirampicam. These are argued to be Middle Paleolithic tools, those Levallois stone tools. These are cores that have had flakes removed. In the middle here, we've got Levallois points. And at the bottom here, we've still got some hand axes being produced. What's so tantalizing about Atirampicam is that the oldest layer where these stone tools have been excavated dates to 385,000 years ago, which is extremely old, making it one of the oldest Middle Paleolithic sites in the entire world. Maybe even the oldest Middle Paleolithic site in the entire world. These are some more stone tools from slightly further north in Andhra Pradesh. Apologies for almost certainly saying that wrong. Again, here we've got some cores. Here, G and H, some Levallois points. C, D, E, and F are again hand axes. That tradition is still going on here. Quick note here though. Notice how E and F are very small hand axes. That's going to be important later. These all date to 247,000 years ago. So there you go, we have very early Levallois technology in South Asia, probably made by a hominin that was like us Homo sapiens, like Neanderthals, like Denisovans. The hard thing is, without human remains, we can't really say much more than that.
There's absolutely no reason why, the middle Pleistocene Homo population that we've got at Narmada is broadly similar to Neanderthals, to Denisovans, and to my mind, probably not that different from Homo sapiens either.
Mm-hmm.
So probably, under the right circumstances, would be in a position to innovate similar sorts of technologies.
As you can see, though, these industries are kind of transitional. There's still some Acheulean tools being produced alongside Middle Paleolithic tools. This suggests that this is really a local innovation, independent innovation going on down here in South Asia. But how long that transition lasted and the factors influencing it is subject to huge debate, because the picture is actually even more complicated. Do the Acheulean and the Middle Paleolithic overlap for a long time in South Asia?
Yeah, that's one of the key areas where South Asia is really quite weird. It's got the youngest Acheulean industries in the world. So in Eastern Africa, it's at Mizo around 214,000 years ago is the youngest late Acheulean there. In Arabia, you see something slightly younger around the Wabmi, it's 170, 180. But Bamburi and Para in the middle Son Valley, which is in central India, you're dating to 140 to 120,000 years ago.
Mm.
So that's, 100,000 years ago after it's disappeared from Eastern Africa.
So we have a site with the earliest examples of Middle Paleolithic technology, other sites with the youngest examples of Acheulean technology. What kind of forces could have driven this variation?
So, and I think one of the things that kind of muddies this issue, and even, again, I'll probably refer quite a lot to Eastern Africa here, but actually, even in the young Acheulean, like some of the most recent Acheulean in Eastern Africa, you find the appearance of Levallois technology, this key aspect of the Middle Paleolithic, but often in low frequencies, compared to this focus on bifacial technology, which is still the dominant aspect of the assemblage. And at some point that switches. So it's not always just a presence or absence sort of argument. Is my point there. Sometimes it's proportional with reference to the assemblage that it's in.
The existence of these two technologies alongside each other for such a long time is challenging, though.
And this is where the findings from Atarampakam kind of jar with that otherwise quite simple model, as it's suggesting that there's perhaps within the region, 250,000 years of overlap between Acheulean technology and Middle Paleolithic technology.
Yeah.
And
which is such a colossal, it's easy to get lost in the numbers, but that's such a colossal amount of time.
I mean, it's almost as long as we would, recognize our species to existed for, that there could have been this overlap, which is huge.
Yeah.
And I find that difficult to explain.
My first instinct upon learning that there was two different technological traditions surviving for a long time alongside each other was that there was multiple different hominins producing them.
I don't see an immediate need to jump that they must be different populations doing it. I think that's partly because, without either genetics or some fossils to go on, we can keep on populating with more and more different hominins if we like. So for me, it's why was it happening down in the southeast, and why didn't it spread elsewhere? And it's that question of was it really an enduring thing that always persisted there, or was it momentary and related to some very specific conditions?
Climate and environment are obviously two huge factors that could have played a role.
So India or South Asia comes under this rule called Oriental Zone or Oriental Realm, okay, which has this so many pockets of natural resources which are evergreen, okay. Mm-hmm. In a way, like even there's certain kind of a table turning environmental shift is happening around the globe, becoming super arid conditions. Mm-hmm. But you always have these pockets which can support hominin populations. And India has, not India, I will say South Asia has multiple set of these pockets. We are not traveling for sake of traveling. We are traveling in search of resources or better habitats. But when you have one which supports your need, which nourishes you, caters you what you seek, actually you don't need to go far off regions. You can build that cocoon or ecological cocoon where you grow and grow and grow and does not have to be in contact.
As I said at the start, Homo erectus was still around at this time 100,000 years ago on Java. But that's sort of easy to explain because Java is so tucked away on the southeast of Eurasia. It wasn't an island at this time, but it's still extremely remote, extremely mountainous region. So their survival in that area is sort of simple to explain in a way. But explaining the persistence of Acheulean technologies in South Asia is more difficult.
Because when you note 250,000 years of overlap or potential overlap between Middle Paleolithic in the southeast and late Acheulean in kind of north and west, what was separating them?
Even after the disappearance of Acheulean, it doesn't get any easier to untangle what's going on. Archaeologist Praveen Kumar talked me through some of the most important sites at this time, 100,000 years ago.
That is a middle zone valley where I am not right now. I am working in this area, eastern part of the India.
Sites like Sandhav, which has pretty good evidence of a Homo sapiens population.
It's an interesting discovery from the Sandhav because Tank Point is in Africa, North Africa. Atherian points, they actually associate with modern humans.
Yeah, the Tang points that Praveen and others excavated here at Sandhav, called Atherian points, are especially interesting because at the same time they're found across North Africa and are associated with modern Homo sapiens. Could this population also have been present at the same time in South Asia?
Yeah, so in Western India and coastal region, discovery of this tank point and date of this tank point is very interesting. So this tank point is byproduct of modern human. I don't know. It's a big question.
This point is great evidence of Homo sapiens in South Asia at that time. But at other locations, Middle Paleolithic assemblages still have small diminutive bifaces, just like the ones from Andhra Pradesh that was 247,000 years old. The youngest of these diminutive bifaces was found just down the road from Sandow and dates to 69,000 years old.
It's 69 kilo years.
Oh, wow. That's really...
1.5 to 69.
Yeah.
That's what we are talking about.
Damn. I think the real archaeology nerds in my audience out here can see why this region is so interesting. At every single step, it just forbids us from forming any simple conclusion. It's like, oh, we have Atherian points, so Homo sapiens are in the region, right? Well, maybe, but somebody is also still producing bifaces, and they're found alongside Middle Paleolithic tools. It's just so complex. I absolutely love it. There's probably only one technology which is really going to help us get to grips with all this diversity. Okay, this paper is what started my whole obsession, my whole South Asian rabbit hole deep dive, using hominin introgression to trace modern human dispersals. Basically, using evidence of archaic genetics in modern populations, modern Asian and Oceanian populations, to try and peel back history a little bit and understand what was going on deep in prehistory. I reached out to Joao Teixiera, author of the paper, to learn more.
The paper we wrote was essentially focusing, or the idea was to focus on island Southeast Asia. When we try to unpack sort of the signals of archaic introgression in island Southeast Asia, we realized we just have to, pull the movie backwards and sort of like look of what was happening before to try to fit it all together. And one thing that I want to make clear is that there's a myriad of alternative models that could explain the data. And we have to sort of combine the pieces that we find with models that make sense from an archaeological point of view. Because this is a perspectives paper. It's really taking other people's work and sort of combine different lines of evidence to sort of try and make a cohesive, view. But I mean, it's mostly going to be wrong, probably. Somebody's going to show us that we're very wrong in maybe, 1 year or 2 years. But for now, I would say most things that are there genetically, I think they're holding.
As you can see, from all of those caveats, the picture is very complex, but the clues that geneticists have unearthed are really intriguing.
There are a couple of papers that had come out just before we wrote our paper. One of them by Browning et al. in Cell provided evidence for 2 episodes of admixture with Denisovans. And the way they saw this, or the way they infer these 2 episodes, is that the admixing Denisovan populations were genetically distinct. So they found admixture with like a high affinity population to the Altai genome, right, from the fossil or from the pinky finger.
Yeah.
But they also found evidence for a more distant, sort of distantly related Denisovan-like group, which they reported in Australo-Papuans, so people from New Guinea and Australia, but also South Asians, Gujarati, Punjab. Okay, so that's one paper. And then another paper tried to model Neanderthal and Denisovan admixture with modern humans using multiple demographic modeling and deep learning. And so they tested like different plausible scenarios given what we know more or less, where this process is, or like sort of limiting to a decent amount of models that would be plausible. And they found support for 2 distinct models, which both included admixture from a group which was equidistant between Neanderthals and Denisovans in the ancestors of South Asians, East Asians, and Australo-Papuans. So you can imagine as that sort of radiation of modern humans went east in Eurasia, and before they split, they sort of received this genetic input from a population that sort of, was genetically in between Neanderthals and Denisovans.
So there you have it. Possible genetic signals of a Denisovan-like population, or something in between a Denisovan and a Neanderthal, equally related to those groups. They gave this group the placeholder name Extinct Hominin 1, and based on the modern populations that have this admixture, they proposed that Extinct Hominin 1 lived in the region of South Asia. Everyone east of that point seems to have that genetic signal, so that makes a lot of sense. When we consider South Asia's position geographically, it does sit right in between where we know Neanderthals are living, where we know Denisovans are living. So some population that is related to both, it's entirely plausible. It's entirely plausible that Extinct Hominin 1 was making those tools in South Asia. Though obviously we do have to interpret these results cautiously.
But now, people move.
Yeah.
So we're most likely wrong. But what I think it's important is that, yes, that is possible that some of these mixing events that we're detecting are not necessarily like from these discrete groups from which we have like sort of a couple of genomes, or a handful of Neanderthal plus 1 Denisovan. But there's more to it. So it gets more reticulated than that. And we need, now, is there a fossil group that's going to correspond to that? Maybe not.
What this really shows is that Neanderthals and Denisovans are not really a separate species. They're like 2 points on a spectrum. And in between those 2 points is obviously going to be a group that is related to both of them. And that group may well have lived in South Asia. That group may well have been producing these Middle Paleolithic tools. I've had to come for a walk to process all my thoughts about this issue. This has been the hardest video I've ever had to make, bar none. You can see how long it's taken me by how often my facial hair's changed, how often the background's changed. I've tried to maintain a consistent facial hair for the whole time and absolutely failed. Every time I try to create like a simple but but honest narrative about what was going on in South Asia, I failed. I absolutely failed. I couldn't construct all of this information into a simple tale. And I realized that's because what makes South Asia so special is the complexity. Sometimes we can get so focused on what a Neanderthal is doing, what were Homo sapiens doing, what was Homo erectus doing, blah, 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 blah. We focus in on one group doing something at one particular time. And it sort of creates this false impression in our mind that these were truly distinct groups. When we study South Asia, when we study the literal geographic bridge between all of these populations, we can see human evolution for the truly complex beast that it was. From the Narmada Cranium, which is archaic and modern and like Homo sapiens and like Homo erectus, and to the tools where the transition from Acheulean to Middle Paleolithic is so drawn out over hundreds of thousands of years. DNA evidence of admixture with a population that isn't a Neanderthal or a Denisovan. It's something in between these two groups. You know, with South Asia, there's no easy answers. There's no simple models. You have to confront the reality of evolution, the complexity of evolution. There's no way around it. There's absolutely no line of evidence will provide you with a simple conclusion. It's incredible. I love it. It's fantastic. Imagine what we're going to learn in 20 years more studying this region. Mind-blowing. Mind-blowing stuff.
Making such long, research-intensive videos would not be possible without the help of NordVPN. I've been using them since November 17th, 2018, if you can believe that, because I'm a British guy in America. Here's my ID. And I just want to watch BBC shows. I want to watch Attenborough's Mammoth Graveyard. I'm not going to miss out on that. NordVPN has a ton of worldwide servers, so in one simple click, you can switch all of your devices over to Britain and see how they hunted mammoths in prehistory. And they keep you safe by hiding your IP, so if you're using a public internet, there's no need to worry. They have next level encryption, and their no logs policy means that they're not keeping a track of you either. Just in case the TV licensing people try and track you down for your unlicensed Attenborough action, it's an all-in-one solution. It's really a no-brainer. I've genuinely used it. Don't needlessly limit your access to BBC archaeology shows. Head to nordvpn.com/Stefan Milo for a massive discount on a 2-year plan, plus 4 extra months absolutely free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so it's risk-free. You're not going to regret it. Thank you, NordVPN, for sponsoring the video. Thank you to my generous Patreons and to everyone that helped contribute. It's really, I'm really very lucky. Thank you all so much.